and I was being held down anyway by people telling me who I could employ and who I couldn't employ and what religion there had to be, and I didn't think religion was anything to do with whether you were a good hairdresser or not, and I was getting really an awful lot on my plate which shouldn't have been there. So anyway, we went on living, and you get used to living in danger, and you get used to watching the news and seeing all that happened during the day, and I was beginning to get just a bit fed up. I didn't know what with, whether it was my job, or whether it was my life, or whether it was Northern Ireland, but I know that I was going through a phase of not being terribly settled or happy. And sometimes at night I often thought of things that my dad had told me and all the scriptures he had taught me as I was growing up, and thinking to myself, what's happening to me? What am I looking for? And then I thought to myself, well, I'm not looking for religion, but maybe my dad's right, maybe girls get married and lifelong partner and settle down, and even if they don't have children, they have a close-knit relationship in marriage. So I went out to visit my daughter for a holiday, and while I was out there, I met a man in the army, and him and I went out for a little while, and he asked me to marry him, and I said yes, and he came over to Belfast, and him and I got married, and we started out on our married life, me as an army wife. I went to Germany to live with him, and during that time, as I was in my married quarter, I asked them if I could practice my hair and beauty in my married quarter to give me an extra income, and they said yes. So I was working in Germany during the day, and I was doing beauty at night and doing hair, and I was prospering financially, and I had sold my beauty salon, so I was really financially getting quite secure, and I went on ahead in my marriage, and I thought, well, I'm married this time and I know what I'm doing. I'm not a kid anymore, although I was still very young. I'm not a kid, and I know what marriage is all about. So the first thing that happened to us was my husband was sent to the Falklands, and he was away all through the Falkland War, and I was going ahead with all that I had to do, and there was something eating away at my inside all the time. And one night I sat down and I said, what am I looking for? What is wrong with me? I've got enough money, I've got a good job, I've done all that I wanted to do in beauty. What is it that I want? And a couple of weeks after that, I was standing in the kitchen, and a voice said to me, it's me you're looking for. And I thought, who? That must be God. No, I'm not looking for you. And there I'm standing in the kitchen, arguing with God. No, it's not you I'm looking for. I don't want religion. I don't know what it is I'm looking for, but I know one thing, I'm going to find it. And and every time I went to do anything, I heard this voice which said, it's me you're looking for. And this went on for about 6 weeks. So one day I stopped and I went into the living room, and I got down on my knees and I said, Lord, if it's you I'm looking for, would you please come into my heart and change me and give me peace and let me know that I have found what I'm looking for. I didn't hear any bells ringing. or I didn't didn't see any bright lights or anything, but I just knew that I felt this lovely peace had come over me. So quite a few weeks went by, and one of my girlfriends in the army said to me, "Sally, what's the matter with you these days?" And I said, "Why?" And she said, "You're changing." And I said, "How am I change?" She said, "Well, you don't drink so much and you don't party so much." Now notice that she didn't say you don't drink and you don't party, because I was still doing those things, but in much reduced way. And she said, "You're really changing." So I said to her, "It must be that prayer I prayed." And she said, "What prayer?" And I said, "I prayed this prayer and asked Jesus if it was him I was looking for, would he come into my life and change me?" And she said, "Well, you're certainly changing." So I thought, he must have heard that prayer. So I went out in Germany and I bought a Bible, and I could only get one Bible in English, and it was a little white Living Bible, and that became my daily food. I was never out of it. While my husband was at the Falklands, I read it and read it and read it. And whenever my husband came back from the Falklands, he was asked where he would like to be posted to, because he'd been on the front line in the Falklands and they thought he deserved a break. So he asked, could he go to Shoebury-Naas down near Bury St Edmunds as a teacher to the TA, where he could come home every night and have a family life. And they said yes. So off we went and settled down in Bury St Edmunds, me as a Christian and him just back from the war in the Falklands. And we settled down, and I still was looking for something. And I said to my husband, "You know I'm a Christian now." And he said, "Oh, don't worry about that, it'll pass. It's only a phase you're going through because I've been away so long." And I said, "No, it's not. I've really found what I'm looking for, and I know that I have Jesus in my heart, and this is what I've been looking for all my life." And he said to me, "I don't think so. I think it's the circumstances that we've gone through has made you think like that, and all the things you came through in Northern Ireland." He said, "No, you can't be a Christian." He says, "With me, I'm in the army, and it's not compatible with being a Christian." So anyway, we settled down in Bury St Edmunds, and I went on with my Christian life, and I went to the prayer meetings, and my husband didn't stop me, and I went to Bible study, and I went to church on Sunday, and then I said to myself, "Well, I'm married now," and my dad said, "Decent girls get married," but I can't say that I'm any happier. I must say I'm settled. I have a husband, and I'm living away from Belfast, and I'm quite settled in my life. And then I couldn't believe it. I got the biggest shock that I've ever had. I was in the kitchen one day and my husband came in and he said to me, "I'd like to talk to you." And I said, "What about?" And he said, "I'm leaving you." And I said, "You what?" And I said to myself, there was me trying to be a good wife, trying to make up for all the mistakes that I made, and here I am, he's leaving me. And I said, "What are you leaving me for?" And he said, "I don't want a Christian wife." He said, "I'm sorry, I would rather have my party girl. I would rather had you when you were going out drinking and dancing, and we stayed up to all hours in the morning." He said, I don't like you the way you are at all. He said, I would call you goody-goody. And I thought, well, a bit of me was pleased that I'd changed so much, but a bit of me was scared to be left on my own in a strange town with no means of support. So anyway, he was serious about it, and he walked out on me and went off, and he got himself a little house, and I had to get out of my married quarter, which left me completely alone in a strange town. But by this time I had joined Women Aglow, and I knew a lot of people, a lot of the women, and I went to live with one of the women in Women Aglow till I sorted myself out. Left down at Bury St Edmunds on my own, and I was praying by this time and learning to follow God and listen to His voice, and I came up to stay with my daughter to decide what I wanted to do. And her baker came in and he said to me, hello, you Shirley's mum? And I said, yeah. And he said to me, you here on holiday? And I said, no, I'm actually looking for somewhere to live. And he said, well, I live at Patrington Haven. I own the shop in the caravan site. You should go out there and have a look. There's some lovely caravans. Well, I had 2 dogs at the time, so Shirley and I came out to Patrington Haven, and we stepped out through the caravan gates, and a voice said to me, this is your new home. And I thought, thank you, Lord. It's great being a Christian and being guided by the Lord. No worries about making mistakes. If you listen carefully and walk closely with the Lord, then everything works out according to His plan and not yours. So I went and saw the manager, and I said to him, have you any caravans for sale? And he said, yes. How much have you? And I said, £5,000, which I had from a sale of my beauty salon. And he says, £5,000 wouldn't buy you much. He said, we have caravans at £25,000. And I said, well, I've only 5,000. So I said to him, there's my daughter's number. I'm staying with my daughter, and if anything comes up, I just knew the Lord had said, this is your new home. And if I had to have a new home, He was going to buy it for me. I had come that far in faith. So my daughter and I went back, and 3 days later he rang and he said, I have a surprise for you. We have a man who's going to buy a big caravan, and he's selling his little small one. He says it would just suit you lovely. He said it has 2 little bedrooms, and he said it would do you and your dogs. And Shirley and I went out to see it, and it was just what the doctor ordered for me. It had a shower room, it had a carport, it had 2 little bedrooms if I wanted to put anybody up. It had a little tiny kitchen and a little shower room and a place to park my car, and it was in a lovely area in Patrington Haven, and I was over the moon. I got down on my knees and thanked God, and I moved into that caravan, and I spent 7 months in my Bible. I didn't know what God was doing with me, but He was certainly teaching me, and all the scriptures that I read, my Father's words came back to me. Whenever I used to say to Him, I will pull down my barns and I'll build greater, and I'll say to my soul, eat, drink and be merry. You've much goods laid up for many years. And I thought, all those things my dad told me, and I saw people getting killed in their 20s by bombs and gun battles, and I realised that all those things, although we need money and we need to have money to keep paying our bills and all, but I knew that they weren't everything, and all I wanted was money when I started off. So anyway, I moved into this caravan and I was so happy, and I met a lady 3 caravans down who was in exactly the same place as I used to be, was miserable and didn't know what she wanted. Her name was Mary, and her and I got friendly, and we spent many hours together, and I led her to the Lord, and she became my prayer partner and my best friend. We were just like sisters. We went everywhere together. And then somebody asked me, would I go and give my testimony? And I thought, what's a testimony? I have no testimony. And they said, oh yes you have. Look what you've came from too, and how the Lord is leading you. And I said, is that a testimony? And the first place I give my testimony was in Thirsk Town Hall, and after that the offers kept coming in for me to go and give my testimony, and I didn't know why. I just knew it must be God. So Mary and I became prayer partners, and she looked after my dogs while I went and spoke all the places that I was asked to go. And one day I was asked to give my testimony in the United Reformed Church in Withersea, and I thought to myself, that sounds like a traditional church. So I went up to see it, and there was a big notice board on the front, and there was a man's name on it who was an elder. So I rang him and I said to him, my name is Sally Bryden, and I've been asked to give my testimony in your church, and I don't think it's a sort of testimony for your church. And he said, you want to tell me a bit about it? So I told him what was happening to me, and he said, praise the Lord, come and give your testimony. We've been praying for somebody like you to go into our platform for 17 years. So this is what I done. I went and I gave my testimony, and I was there 2 years. I also had got baptised at Hollybush and stayed up there for a while, and I met Jim and Cynthia Wilkinson, who taught me ever such a lot. They taught me that Jesus heals today, Jesus performs miracles today, and their book Miracle Valley I read over and over again, and I said, Lord, everything that's in that book, I want it. So anyway, I kept going to the United Reformed Church in Withersea, and I was living in my caravan in Paddington Haven, which wasn't too far, and Mary started coming to church with me in the URC, and I was away giving my testimony, and I was going to the URC, and Mary and I was growing in the Lord, and I was always in my Bible, and everything I learned I passed on to Mary, and she watched me live on the Lord, and money coming in from the Lord, because I had no income from anywhere, because my husband stopped my income and I didn't have any money from him. So I learned that this was living in faith, but I'd never heard of this. But I rang one of my father's preaching friends, because my father had died during this time, and I was so upset about losing him. And I rang one of his friends and I said, my husband has left me and I'm on my own, and I'm living in the caravan. Will the Lord look after me? And he said, hang on in there, God never deserts his own, just learn to trust him. So I asked the Lord to show me how to do this, but I did miss my father because I was always able to go to him and always able to tell him, you know, what I wanted to do, even though I disagreed with him. But he always sat and listened, and he was a good listener, and I really missed him when he passed on. And yet deep in down I knew that he was with the Lord. So I carried on with Mary, and her and I started going to places, and we went to conferences, and the Lord was using us, and we started seeing people getting saved. And I have a few testimonies here that I'd like to pass on, which happened to us when the Lord started using me, and I'd like to share some of these testimonies with you that happened to us. I asked the Lord to use me, and I was surprised when he started to use me. I really loved him, and I wanted to give my whole self to him. And I stripped myself down one night before the Lord at his altar, and I offered myself, and I sang, I surrender all, every bit of me, to use for your honour and your glory. And the first thing that happened was this man in the village had got to know me, and I met him when he was out walking his dog on the beach, and he took cancer, and he sent for me to pray for him, and he was taken into hospital, and I went to visit him, and I sat with him while he passed away, and he gave his heart to the Lord, and he was so peaceful, and he said to me, I'm so glad you came to see me. I'm not afraid anymore. I know what's wrong with me, and I'm real at peace, and I know I'm right with God. The next thing that happened to me was I went to get my flu jab one day, and I met Mary's aunt, who looks after abused dogs, and she said to me, hello Sally, do you remember me? And I said, yes I do. And she said, are you still doing that born again thing? And I said, Auntie Jean, I'll always be born again till the day I die, 'cause it's for life. And she said, I would like to be born again. And I said, are you going for your flu job? And she said, yeah. I said, let's go into doctors and find a little spot, and I'll pray for you, and you can be born again before you go out of the doctors. So there we were, sitting in a corner of the doctor's waiting room, and she was praying, dear Lord, I know I am a sinner, and I want you to come into my life. And that was another convert, and I thought to myself, this is great, the Lord's really using me. And every time I went out, I seemed to meet somebody that I was able to witness to. So that was Jim, and that was me. Mary's auntie lived in London, and Mary's daughter passed out of the army, and she invited us to her passing out parade, and we stayed with Mary's aunt, and Mary's aunt had a disease where she had to go in and have her blood changed every so often, and I was sitting talking to her, but I wasn't trying to make an impression, or I wasn't preaching at her. So I came back home, and one day I was Mary's, and her aunt rang, and she said, do you remember that lady you brought down to stay with us? And Mary said yes, and she said, do you ever see her? And Mary says, she's here, she's sitting in the chair. And she said, could I speak to her? And Mary says yes, so she gave me the phone, and she said to me, do you remember what you were telling me about Jesus in my life? And I said yes. She said, well, I would like to have that. And so I led her to the Lord over the telephone, and Mary couldn't believe when she heard me praying a sinner's prayer over the telephone for her aunt, and her aunt passed away a few weeks later, and I thought, what a wonderful God I serve. He's just in time for everybody. And it made me feel good to know that God never loses a soul that's looking for him. The next thing was I have Debbie Milne, who's in the church at the moment. She's an elder now, and I was listening to her on the platform giving the announcements out last Sunday, and Debbie met me in the church, and I said to her one day, Debbie, I think the Lord's speaking to you, and it's time you were giving your heart to him. And she said, yes, I think you're right. So anyway, I said to her, would you like to do it next week when I come, and we'll sit and talk about it? And she said, no, I'd like to give my heart to the Lord now. So I said, well, you'll have to do it in the back of the car, because I've Jean Sizer in the hospital getting her stitches out after surgery, and I have to go back and pick her up. So I went back and picked Jean up and came out, and Debbie joined us in the back seat, and there we were in the back seat of my car leading Debbie to the Lord. And she's here today in the church, and she'll tell you that this is a true story of her conversion, and she's been going on in the URC ever since that. So these things started happening to me, and it was wonderful to be able to put your arms around somebody and feel such compassion for them, because I knew that the Lord, every time he went to heal or save, it always said, and the Lord had compassion on the multitude. And I asked for compassion, because I knew that God seemed to bring that before he did anything wonderful, and I asked for that compassion. These things started making sense to me, and all these conversions, I was really enjoying watching what the Lord was doing with my life. And then we started a prayer group, a few women and us. There was Kay and Tony and the few more people, and Kay's brother said he wanted to see me one time, and I was abroad at the time. So when I came home, I went down to see him, and he cried his way through to the Lord, and he became a Christian. And he was only a Christian weeks whenever he went to Lanzarote for his holidays, and he came back and took a massive heart attack and passed away to be with the Lord, but not before Philip had baptized him. Him and Tony had baptized all our new converts, and we had a wonderful time watching them all. And Kay's brother went home to be with the Lord, and I thought again, what a wonderful Lord I serve. He never misses a person who's looking for him. So I was still in the URC by this time, and we started a prayer meeting to pray for a pastor, and we got a pastor, and I couldn't believe it when the pastor came from the same area of Belfast that I came from, and he just changed. We changed my accent on the platform for his accent, and people were used to me. So it was wonderful to see him coming along, and I kept him right about what his English sayings were and what his Irish sayings were, and we all got along famously. And I went into his pastoral care to look after all his people who were sick, and I was working in pastoral care for years. And then one night I went down to speak in Shoebury-Naas, and there was a man in the congregation called Philip Conybeare, and he was sitting watching me, and I didn't know who he was, but he came to speak to me after the service, and we had a long chat and we kept in touch. And he came up to see me in Yorkshire and I went down to see him in Southend and we got really friendly, and then he asked me to marry him, and I thought he